The night the Marines stormed into the ICU, no one noticed the quiet nurse in the corner. They noticed the boots first. Heavy, synchronized, echoing down the sterile hospital corridor like distant thunder rolling toward a fragile shore. They noticed the crisp uniforms, the rigid posture, the command in their presence. But for 3 long years before that night, no one had noticed her. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in honoring people who serve without applause, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder of silent strength, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Her name was Evelyn Carter, and in the ICU at St. Matthew's Medical Center, she was known simply as Eve. She was the nurse who volunteered for double shifts when staffing ran thin. The one who took the most difficult patients without complaint. The one who stayed past her clock-out time to brush an elderly woman's hair or hold the trembling hand of a man who knew he would not see morning. She wore plain scrubs, kept her hair tightly pinned, and walked with a calm efficiency that blended into the background like hospital wallpaper. No one asked about the faint scar that ran from her wrist to just below her elbow. No one asked why she sometimes stiffened at sudden loud noises. No one wondered why her posture was ramrod straight when a code was called. In the chaos of hospital life, people saw what they expected to see, just another overworked nurse. 3 years earlier, Evelyn had arrived at St. Matthew's quietly. Her application had been unremarkable, though her clinical experience was extensive. She had listed previous service in the United States Marine Corps, but the HR manager had skimmed past it, more focused on certifications and references. In interviews, she spoke gently, carefully choosing words. She did not volunteer stories from her past. She did not mention desert heat or the smell of dust and metal after explosions. She did not mention the men she had carried from battlefields with blood soaking through her gloves. Instead, she let her work speak. The ICU was a place where machines hummed and alarms beeped like a strange mechanical symphony. Fluorescent lights washed the world in pale white. The air carried the scent of antiseptic and fear. It was a place of fragile boundaries between life and death, and Evelyn navigated it with quiet mastery. Some of the younger nurses thought she was cold. She didn't gossip during breaks. She didn't linger over coffee in the staff lounge. She ate quickly, alone, often reviewing charts. When new nurses panicked during their first code blue, she was the steady pair of hands guiding them through compressions and medication dosages. When families broke down in waiting rooms, she was the calm voice explaining ventilators and blood pressure readings. Still, she remained invisible. Then came the night everything changed. It was close to midnight when the trauma helicopter roared overhead, rattling the windows. The emergency department called ahead, multiple casualties from a training accident at a nearby Marine Corps base. Severe injuries. Burns. Internal bleeding. 2 critical, 1 unstable. The ICU braced itself. Stretchers burst through the double doors in a rush of urgency. Young men in camouflage, faces pale beneath soot and blood. Dog tags clinking faintly against metal rails. Nurses and doctors moved in coordinated chaos, attaching monitors, starting 4 lines, assessing damage. Evelyn stepped forward without hesitation, her eyes scanning the injuries with clinical precision. The first Marine she touched was barely conscious, his breathing shallow. The second had shrapnel embedded along his side. The third, the most critical, was already intubated, his body rigid with trauma. Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest as she recognized the insignia on their uniforms. Memories she kept buried stirred like embers reignited. She did not falter. For hours she worked, sweat beading at her temples, hands steady as she administered medications and adjusted ventilator settings. She moved with a rhythm that seemed almost rehearsed, anticipating complications before they arose. When one Marine's blood pressure plummeted, she reacted instantly, calling out precise orders, guiding the team through stabilization. A young resident glanced at her in awe. He had never seen such composure. Around 3 in the morning, the ICU doors opened again. This time it wasn't stretchers. It was a formation. A dozen Marines entered in full dress uniform, boots gleaming under the fluorescent lights. They moved with solemn purpose, their faces carved from discipline and grief. Hospital security hesitated but stepped aside as the commanding officer presented official credentials. They were there for their men. Staff members froze. The sight was overwhelming, an ocean of dark blue uniforms against sterile white walls. Evelyn was adjusting a monitor when she sensed the change in atmosphere. She turned slowly. The Marines stopped as one. Their commanding officer's eyes scanned the room, and then landed on her. Time seemed to narrow to a single point. He took a step forward, his posture shifting from authority to something deeper, more personal. The Marines behind him followed his gaze. One by one, recognition dawned across their faces. In perfect unison, boots snapped together. And then, in a sound that shook the very air of the ICU, 12 Marines raised their hands in salute. "Staff Sergeant, ma'am." The words rang out like a bell tolling through silence. Monitors continued to beep. A ventilator hissed softly. But the world inside that room had shifted forever. Every nurse, every doctor, every patient's family member stared at Evelyn. She stood very still. For a fleeting second, the hospital walls seemed to dissolve, replaced by desert horizons and blazing sun. She remembered the weight of her uniform, the rank pinned to her collar. She remembered leading a medical evacuation under enemy fire, dragging 2 injured Marines to safety while shrapnel tore through the sand around her. She remembered the explosion that had thrown her backward, leaving that scar along her arm and a deeper one in her memory. She had never spoken of the Silver Star citation that followed. She had never framed the commendation letter signed by a general. When her service ended after a medical discharge, she folded those pieces of paper into a box and stored them out of sight. Because she did not serve for recognition. She served because someone had to run toward the wounded when others ran away. In the ICU, under fluorescent lights instead of desert sun, she lowered her clipboard slowly. Her back straightened instinctively. With measured dignity, she returned the salute. Gasps echoed softly through the room. The commanding officer stepped closer, his voice thick with emotion he struggled to contain. He spoke not as a superior, but as a grateful leader. He acknowledged her past service, her courage during a mission that had saved lives, including the life of one of the Marines now fighting for survival in the very ICU where she worked. The unstable patient in bed 4 had once been the young private she shielded from an explosion. No one in the hospital had known. The resident who once thought she was cold felt his throat tighten. The nurses who had whispered about her aloofness stared in stunned silence. The hospital administrator, summoned by the commotion, looked as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Evelyn's eyes glistened, but her voice, when she spoke, was steady. She said she was just doing her job, then and now. The Marines requested a moment with their injured brothers. Hospital policy bent that night under the weight of something larger than rules. One by one, they approached the bedsides, whispering words of strength, promising to stand watch. Evelyn observed from a respectful distance, her heart pounding with emotions she had locked away for years. After the formation left, the ICU did not return to normal. Word spread through the hospital by morning. The quiet nurse no one noticed was a decorated Marine staff sergeant. A combat veteran. A hero. But Evelyn resisted the spotlight. When administrators offered a public recognition ceremony, she declined politely. When a local news station called, she refused interviews. She asked only that attention remain on the recovering Marines. Yet something subtle had changed. Colleagues no longer mistook her silence for coldness. They began to see the compassion beneath her composure. They noticed the way she always positioned herself between patience and chaos, like a shield. Younger nurses started seeking her guidance intentionally, not just in emergencies but in everyday practice. She mentored them patiently, teaching not only procedures but resilience. The Marine in bed 4 survived. His recovery was slow and painful, filled with surgeries and physical therapy. During long nights when pain kept him awake, Evelyn sometimes sat beside him, not as a superior officer but as a fellow survivor. She shared small pieces of her story, not the medals, not the glory, but the fear and doubt that follow trauma. She told him healing was not linear. That strength is not the absence of pain but the willingness to keep going. He listened. Months later, when he took his first unassisted steps down the rehabilitation hallway, he insisted she walk beside him. Staff members applauded softly as he passed. This time, the recognition felt right, not loud, not dramatic, but earned through shared endurance. Evelyn's life did not transform into celebrity. She still worked double shifts. She still ate lunch alone sometimes. But invisibility no longer wrapped around her like a shadow. People greeted her with quiet respect. They understood that heroism does not always announce itself. Sometimes it wears simple scrubs and moves silently through hospital corridors. And in moments of crisis, when alarms blared and fear surged, the ICU staff found themselves looking instinctively toward her, drawing strength from her steady presence. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in honoring silent warriors, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach those who need them most. There is one more thing I ask before we close. In the comments below, write the word salute if you believe that true heroes do not need recognition to serve. Years later, the echo of boots in the ICU would fade into memory, but the lesson remained. Not all uniforms are visible. Not all battles happen on distant fields. Some are fought under fluorescent lights, in quiet rooms filled with machines and fragile hope. The ICU nurse nobody noticed had never needed applause. She carried her rank in her spine, her courage in her hands, and her compassion in every life she touched. And on one unforgettable night, when Marines stormed in and saluted, "Staff Sergeant Ma'am," the world briefly caught up to what had always been true. Greatness does not demand to be seen. It simply serves. And sometimes, if we are lucky, we are given the chance to finally notice.